another episode of What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Today's episode is going to be a little different because I interview so many fiction writers and I've interviewed musicians and artists, but I haven't interviewed enough nonfiction writers. And so I'm really excited about my guest today. Let me just tell you a little bit about her. Oh, I'm Karen E. Osborne. In case you don't know, I'm your host. And this is one of those times when both of my worlds come together because I am an author, but I'm also senior strategist at the Osborne Group, a consulting firm, an international consulting firm. So I'm kind of happy that these two worlds are going to just meld as I tell you about my wonderful guest, Angelique Grant, doctor, if you please. She has her PhD, serious woman. So she's senior consultant and principal at the inclusion firm, seasoned industry leader with more than 27 years of experience in the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors. And as a senior consultant, she provides counsel on diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, something that we need so much in these times, fundraising and nonprofit strategies. And she wrote a book. She co-authored Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Advancement, a guide to strengthening engagement and fundraising. And it serves as a guidebook for nonprofit teams seeking to move from awareness of DEI to actual action and sustained behavioral change. Welcome, Angelique.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to your podcast. And it's so great to be here.
So glad to see you. So these are really exciting, but somewhat scary and bewildering times as we face, first of all, this whole hybrid workspace, and coming, are we coming back to work fully? Are we working from home? And then how do I navigate as a leader all the promises I made last year to diversity, equity, and inclusion, all those things that after, George Floyd and the world just finally saw, and we tried to change, but it's hard, and it's hard to do it in a hybrid world. And so I just wanted to ask you, from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges that you're finding leaders are facing? I know you work in both the government space, you work in the nonprofit space. What are you seeing?
Yeah. To your point, I've spent many years working with nonprofits on diversity, equity, inclusion. We'll say DEI, you'll hear that. And it's so important and critical that we see this kind of now a priority and a major part of what we do on an ongoing basis, whether you're with a company or with your nonprofit. And many leaders are indeed grappling with it, as you know, right? I'd have to say, some of the most challenging pieces of this are a couple of things, right? Some people thought that this would blow away, right?
Yeah.
And I was just like sort of this fad. And we're just like, well, not quite, because we have such different generations in the workforce, right? And everyone defines diversity differently, especially when you look at the millennials and Gen Z. They already expect diversity to occur. So we're seeing leaders challenged with that sort of transition and that change, right? And now with the current workforce, the great resignation is real. and we're seeing the impact in the nonprofit industry and various sectors, whether it's performing arts, healthcare, you name it. The recruitment, retention, the talent management piece is probably the most prominent piece that we are experiencing, having conversations with in that regard. Recruiting is very competitive. It's always been competitive in the past, but now it's amplified, right? A lot of organizations are doubling down on their efforts, but then they're also now realizing how important retention is when it comes to just the current workforce, because you can't spend a lot of your time on one end without taking a look at the retention piece. So long are the days, right? Long gone are the days where you hire exceptional talent, because after you brought, let's say, this amazing individual on your team, you have to stop and you think about, okay, now what? Right? I don't think we've had a lot of attention put forth towards retention, whether it's employee engagement, looking at employee satisfaction levels, and especially in this hybrid work environment, right? Because when you're in the office,
Harder,
it's
isn't it?
easier, right? You can engage people, but then when you're at home and you're just like, oh, I feel like I'm in my silo, it becomes a little bit more challenging. So we are seeing leaders taking a look at diversity as it relates to creating that diverse team, equity, looking at it from the retention lens. Are we providing equitable opportunities for everyone on our team, right? Inclusion, right? Are our systems and processes inclusive, whether there's solicitation or volunteer engagement, community engagement, and with the goal of having sort of this great sense of belonging, right? Because you can be inclusive. Inclusive is the behavior, whereas belonging is actually the outcome. Yeah, see how that comes together.
Yes, 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 exactly right. And just so as you think about the book that you co-authored, and you gave it's such a fine, I highly recommend it to you. It's a fine, well-researched, well-written, with real, like, here's what you can do. Do. But then the world changed. I mean, you wrote that book and then it came out, but things have gotten more challenging, as you just mentioned. Things have gotten more difficult in terms of helping people feel included when they're working from Zoom, feeling included. So I just wondered if you were going to add something to the book, or amplify something from the book, what would that be? What might that be?
I would have to say it's the assessment piece. The reason being is because when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, people understand it, right? There's this level of awareness. We are aware that diversity in terms of representation exists. We are aware that I have a meaning, me, you, anyone, a level of knowledge about diversity, equity, inclusion, but then how do we apply it? It's that integration piece that becomes very, again, people kind of grapple with. So with the awareness, we got it, right? Understanding when it shows up, how it shows up is where people are getting stuck, right? Because we go into organizations, we operate in this world as if we understand how other people are experiencing the workplace, or right, the mission of the organization, or interactions with other individuals, but we don't quite know what that is. We assume, we think we know.
We make assumptions, yes.
Right. So the climate, let's say climate survey or an organizational diversity, equity, inclusion assessment, it will get at employee engagement, employee satisfaction, which will help with retention, but it also asks specific questions about, what are some of the greatest opportunities of growth within your organization? You may have a vision. It will help close the gap with that vision. It will confirm some assumptions, if you may, bring about new ones, if you may. But I always say that is a great place to start, because then you're not just guessing and you're not creating sort of a lot of activity as a result. It's almost like they call it scale bias, because diversity, equity, inclusion is such a large challenge societally, globally. We think that all of the efforts that we put together and our plans and our actions must match that scale. When in actuality, if you have an assessment, you'll understand what some tweaks that you can do here and there, right? Redesigning, adapting new models within the organization structures and relationships, if you may. And then it will then become your roadmap, your action plan to move forward down your DEI.
That's unique for your organization, for your team. Also, when you were speaking, the other thing that popped in my mind is without assessment, we often end up solving the wrong problem,
Exactly.
because we didn't know what we assumed, that this is what the issue is. We go off and solve that problem, and no, because we didn't understand what the issue is. So I am such a believer in assessment. I agree with you 100%. That's so, so important. I wanted to talk a little bit, since this is what are you reading, what are you writing? I wanted to talk a little bit about your process, your writing process. I interviewed recently these two amazing women, Angela and Mia, and they, Angela Page and Mia Altieri, if I'm not saying that right, Altieri. Anyway, they wrote a book together on two different coasts. They didn't see each other. They had to do it electronically and everything. And I know that you co-authored this wonderful book, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion in Advancement: A Guide to Strengthening Engagement and Fundraising through Inclusion. And what were some of the challenges, and what worked? What were some of the lessons as you tried to co-author a book?
Yeah. Well, first, I will say it's so funny that when the book was published in 2020, it was shortly thereafter the murder of George Floyd, right? And so it's so timely during that moment. It was in the fall, and everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, you from May when the murder occurred to the publishing date in October." It's like, "Oh my gosh, you did that very quickly." And we're like, "Well, no, not quite." We spent, and I get to your question, 2 years outlining, understanding what the need is in our industry, being intentional about it being a toolkit, a roadmap, because there are some books that inspire, there are some books that are really grounded in research. We felt like the research was there. So how do we get the research and combine it with the strategy? It's that whole integration, building the theories and everything, right? And providing sort of this practical guidance. Because at the end of the day, if we're unable to really take these sort of ideas, strategies, and models and use them, and you said creating something that's tailored to that organization, keeping that at heart as well, because that's how, we always use the term best practices. I'm doing air quotes. We would take someone else's best practices and use it, but sometimes it's better practices, right? So that was one of the big pieces that we really had to stop and think about, because it's really the first one in our industry that approached in that manner as opposed to donor behavior. And I would say that the writing is what I did not expect. The actual sitting down and thinking, you need quiet space. I found that I could write better in the mornings. And then, or on the airplane. So I found myself writing a lot on the plane. It got to a point where we were close to the end of the book, and it was like, maybe I should fly to Japan or something, because I gotta get past this card. But clearly I didn't do that.
I need a really long trip to finish this book.
Karen, that's what I really needed to get past. But that was something that I learned about myself. Ron Schiller, who's the other co-author, we worked seamlessly together. He's written a book before, so it was, again, enlightening to learn the actual background process and manuscripts and edits and approval pieces of it. That
beta readers. All of that, right? All of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I will say the one hard part was stopping the writing, right? Content creation, because there were a couple of chapters that we pulled out at the last minute. So I will say that that was a learning moment. It's like, okay, that's enough.
I am finished. That's so true. Everything you've said about this nonfiction book that you wrote is true for fiction writers as well. You have to decide, first of all, you have to finish it, and you have to find your rhythm, and you have to decide when it's done. it's done. I'm tidying this up now. I am moving on. So that sounds really excellent. There was a point you made that I just wanted to underscore. You were
Mhm.
talking about best practices,
Yes.
but what I liked about your book was it was about proven practices,
That's
because so much of it is data driven. So much of it is so well researched. And I love that term, proven practices, because I think best practices is somebody's opinion,
I agree.
but
I
you
like it.
guys wrote a book with proven practices. So that was wonderful. Is there another book, if somebody listening, watching, wanted to, besides reading your book thoroughly, if they wanted to read another book that might help in either their leadership or in the space of DEI, but do you have a book that you could recommend to our audience?
Absolutely. I would say Gender Matters, A Guide to Growing Women's Philanthropy by Kathleen Layer. I have that here. And you were
Do
talking
you
about
have your
books.
book nearby?
I have my book
Yes,
nearby.
let's put your
Because I
book
know
up.
talk about books. I love books, just for the
There you go.
record.
Okay, cool. So Gender
I have
Matters.
yours,
Yeah,
The Gender Matters by Kathleen Layer.
yeah.
Another great read in our industry as it relates to DEI and fundraising, advancement, external relations. Other books, because again, we're talking diversity, equity, inclusion, integration into the work that we do, and
Yeah.
that's with any industry. I would say, I can't show you these books because I'm an audiobook person.
Me too.
Let me show you my phone on Audible, but Equity by Banal Bopaya. That's a really good. She talks a lot about equity and systems and the systemic aspects of it. Blind Spots by Mazarin Banaji and Anthony Greenwald. Right, that's the implicit bias. That's a must. And then Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility.
Yes,
Those are
that's
people
on my
who-
bookshelf. Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Those are great recommendations that I hope everybody will take to heart. And so I just want to thank you so much for joining us. If folks want to find out more about your firm, want to find out more about your book, want to just find out more about you, where can they find you?
Well, I am The Inclusion Firm, so it's www.theinclusionfirm.com. My name is Angelique Grant, and the book, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Advancement, A Guide to Strengthening Engagement and Fundraising Through Inclusion, can be found at CASE, which is the Council for Advancement and Support of Education. It's our industry's association.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this conversation and that it's got you thinking. If you've been working hard on inclusion and diversity and equity and access, if these are things you've been working hard at, having some support is really important. And so I hope that you found this helpful. And I hope that we will see you next time on What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing?